I hereby call this meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. We have one item on the general agenda. It's an item giving us information on the Vehicle for Hire program and digital dispatching services. Before we move forward to our consent agenda or our general agenda, what I want to do is, first of all, recognize our city manager, Mr. Lee Garrity, and the city manager staff. Also, we have with us our city attorney, Attorney Carmen, our public safety attorney, Ms. Lori Sykes. Also, our public safety personnel, we have our new fire chief, Chief Mayo, with us today. We also have Chief Barry Roundtree, who stepped out, and some of the administration from the police department. And I thought I saw Mr. Milton Sadler with the emergency management department. So thank you all for being here today. And also Assistant Chief Stowe from the fire department. Members of the committee, there are items on the consent agenda for your approval. What is the pleasure of the committee?
Move for approval.
Second.
All right, the full consent agenda has been motioned to be approved. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That is unanimous. The consent agenda is unanimously approved. Item G1, please.
Item G1, information on Vehicle for Hire program and digital dispatching service.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Rod Ring from the City's Department of Transportation, who has a lot of history with this program, will be doing the presentation.
Mr. Ring, we thank you for coming to do the presentation. I know some of the council members at the table have been concerned with transportation. And anytime we think about transportation, we want to make sure our citizens get to and fro as safe and the best way possible. So we're just getting information on our Vehicle for Hire program. So Mr. Ring, you have the floor.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, council members. To begin with, the Vehicle for Hire program, best we could tell, went back to 1975 and was initially in the police department. At that time, you had one major cab company in Winston-Salem. It was Bluebird Cab. They were your traditional company with an owner and a traditional employer-employee relationship. In the early 90s, the Clayton family sold Bluebird Cab to Mr. Michael Silverman, and that we've transitioned, Mr. Silverman transitioned the business to a less traditional, more of a lease cab operation. At that point, anyone with a valid driver's license could come into their company for a nominal fee, lease a cab, and have that cab for 24 hours. At that point, we started seeing a lot of complaints about the cabs in Winston-Salem. Cleanliness, exhaust leaking into the interior of the vehicles, windows not operating. And we looked at the Vehicle for Hire program and the taxi code in general, and we did a major revamp of it, and the enforcement of the program was moved from the police department to the Winston-Salem Department of Transportation. Over the years, the program has grown considerably. We've made significant changes, mostly to do with the appearance of the cars, the drivers, and actually approving the drivers. We now look at each driver's criminal background check, statewide criminal background check. We review a 5-panel drug screen to make sure they have passed the drug screen, and we issue a city driver's identification card so folks who are in the cabs know that they're in a cab that's the driver has been approved to operate. Like I said, the program has grown considerably. As of December of this year, we have 21 limousine companies operating, 9 taxi cab companies, and 2 horse-drawn carriages. We've inspected a total of 71 limousines, 6 horse-drawn carriages, and 114 taxi cabs. I'll be happy to answer any questions or if you want more and further details.
Members of the committee, council members, are there any questions for Mr. Ring at this time about the Vehicle for Hire program?
Are you going to tell us about the digital?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. All right. Then I'll wait.
And just so the public may know, this item has been divided up into 2 particular thoughts of conversation. One, we'll be discussing our Vehicle for Hire program with our cabs. On the other side, we'll be talking a little bit about Uber, which is our digital dispatch program. Well, it's not necessarily the city's program, but it's a private company that's used in North Carolina and all over the United States and actually internationally. Councilmember McIntosh.
And is the lease model still in effect? Is that how?
Yes, it is. There have been some modifications. We now have sub-owners. They actually own their vehicle and they lease dispatch through the particular cab companies, and they pay a fee for that. And they are underneath the umbrella of the master company.
How many firms do we have licensed?
I believe right now we have, just mentioned that. 9 taxi cab companies operating.
It would appear to me that the number of taxi cabs has increased quite a bit over the last 5 to 10 years. Is that fair?
Yes, they have. They've basically doubled in the last 20 years.
And they are all, pretty much all operating under that lease model.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the Vehicle for Hire program? Mr. Ring, if you'll proceed to the digital dispatch program.
Thank you. Well, as you've alluded to, there's a new type of service. I'll refer to it as a non-traditional taxi cab service. The one that we're all familiar with is Uber. Uber originally began about 2009 in San Francisco, and it is essentially a service that's you can reserve and make arrangements to be picked up and dropped off using a telephone app. There are a couple of other services that do the same thing, Lyft and Sidecar, but we haven't heard that they're operating in this area. We were made aware in the summer of 2014 that Uber had a presence in Winston-Salem. We haven't seen a lot of activity. We haven't had a lot of complaints about it. But one of the things when we started looking into Uber and how they're not the traditional taxi cab company, what we found out is that there's a state statute that was passed about a year and a half ago that prohibits cities from regulating digital dispatch service, prevents from regulating price structure, all of the above, everything that we would currently do now with our limousine and taxi companies. In talking to some representatives of Charlotte, that they've had dealings with Uber for a little over a year now. At this point, they have some recommendations, but it's still in committee to be considered. They're looking at the possibility of putting some regulation on Uber, but going at it from the public safety standpoint. Make sure the vehicles are insured properly and that the drivers have been screened properly.
Mr. Ring, just to be clear, the city has the ability to regulate Vehicle for Hire program, i.e. taxis, but we do not have the ability to regulate the digital dispatch companies such as Uber. That's done at the state level if they wish to tackle that at all.
Yes, sir. The state there's state statute that prohibits municipalities from regulating the digital dispatch service.
Councilmember Light.
Okay, so you use the app, ask for a taxi. Where does the taxi come from?
Well, it's very interesting. You can download the app on your phone. Once you enter in, it requires a credit card. Once you enter in your information and you pull the app up, you'll immediately see a map of where you're located, and little pings of Uber vehicles that are nearby will come up. You can select those vehicles. It will connect you via the program to that driver, and then you and the driver will find each other. There's actually no money exchange. The exchange is through Uber. You pay on your credit card, and the driver is paid by Uber. So there is no real-time exchange of money in person.
So, but Uber, the company owns taxi cabs or rents.
Anyone with a vehicle can be an Uber driver. They just have to meet some minimum criteria that they put in place and become a Uber driver with their own personal vehicle.
And Councilmember Light, I've had the opportunity to use the Uber program when I was on the West Coast. And what happens is if you download the app and you ask an Uber driver to come out, you'll know exactly what type of car they're driving, and you'll know exactly what the person looks like. And also you'll be able to negotiate your price, which sometimes makes that a little bit more attractive than the Vehicle for Hire program. And, you know, we were picked up in a almost a brand new Mercedes-Benz, and they took us around, and we were able to negotiate our price. So therein lies the dilemma. Councilmember, excuse me, Councilmember Montgomery. Councilmember Light, did you have a, okay, Councilmember Montgomery.
Two pieces. I know in terms of the exclusion that they have around regulating digital for hire pieces, that exclusion prohibits altogether any registration at all on the local level?
In talking to our attorneys and the folks in Charlotte, it does preclude us from doing any regulation with their dispatch service. There is a little bit of a discussion of where that prohibits us from putting some restrictions on the vehicles. Charlotte at this point hasn't done so, and I'm not aware of any city in North Carolina that has.
Like what? I'm sorry. What sort of restrictions?
Well, like the taxi cabs here, we require that we do yearly inspections on the vehicles, and as they put on, we're currently not doing that with Uber drivers or Uber vehicles.
And that's kind of the question I was saying in terms of even, from the fees that from a vehicle for hires have to pay in that process, those exclusions would prohibit that, even those fees being applied to the,
Yes, sir.
to the Uber side. Okay.
Mhm.
And the other piece, and it may not be as specifically defined, I guess, to Uber, but I guess it could be in the sense that in the current ordinance, the way that it's written, it prohibits the operations of the dispatch or any vehicle for hire to be in a residential, in terms of that being able to be any place residential. Is that correct?
The code as it exists now requires you to comply with City of Winston-Salem codes, and in turn, you comply with the zoning requirements.
Right, and so thus that means you wouldn't be able to do that in
Yeah.
home.
We have no information on the Uber drivers. They don't have a physical presence here. It's all web-based, so they don't have an office or structure or anyone here to contact.
But for your traditional cabs, if they have a home occupancy permit approved by inspection, then they could operate out of a residential, traditional cab.
And that was probably when I was coming back on the traditional. I might need to get with some folks, because I passed a house the other day that had 8 taxi cabs sitting in the driveway. So,
And if you give us what that is, I'm sure we'll look into that, Mr.
Give me
Turner.
the location.
Anyone else wishes to be heard or have any questions for Mr. Ring? Councilmember McIntosh.
Do we have any, I doubt that we do because it's so young, but do we have any idea what sort of market share Uber has in town? And my point there, my question really goes to how much impact is it having on the existing taxi cab business? Is it taking a big chunk or?
Right now, we don't have any data. I know from looking at the app on my phone that typically I see 2 to 3 vehicles available within a 10-mile radius of here when I check it. So I don't think they have a large impact at this point, but we have no way of knowing.
Have we interfaced with Uber at all, talked to them directly?
They had some folks that came into town for one day, and we spoke with them, and they quickly told us we had no authority over them.
So it sounds like we probably would not get a whole lot of cooperation from them if we asked.
Based on what Charlotte said, we would probably get very little cooperation.
I know that we have lost our ability to charge a privilege tax to businesses, but I'm sensing that we have the ability to permit, potentially, Uber.
Not Uber, but just businesses in general. We do have the ability to require a permit and charge a small and nominal fee for the permit process, but I don't know, given all that's required of this work, this is management.
And one of the things to keep in mind is that Uber is not a North Carolina-based firm, and that's one of the issues that the franchise tax was up against in Charlotte.
Right.
That'd be located in
Right. Now, Airbnb and some of those companies that are in a similar but parallel business, the company collects the tax, the sales tax, and the hotel tax in communities where it's applicable, and so the company remits it back to the municipality. One of my reasons that I asked for some background on this is I don't really understand what we look at when we are asked to approve a carriage or a taxi company's license to operate. What is behind our approval? We just get a name and how many cabs they operate, and we're asked to approve or disapprove. I don't really feel like I have any basis for saying this is a good or bad company. I approve or disapprove. So what are the metrics that we use on?
Mr. Ring can tell you about the process we go through to vet the companies, but the answer to your question of what are the criteria we use to recommend the company to you is that the council in the past has considered whether you wished to determine a maximum number of cabs in the city. The council has decided that that wasn't something that it wanted to do, that the market would determine, and therefore, if a firm meets all the requirements of your ordinance, they are recommended to you for approval. If they do not, then we advise that that firm should not be approved by council, and we don't bring it forward with a recommendation. But if they meet the safety requirements and the insurance requirements and all the other things that are in the ordinance, then they are recommended automatically.
Is there any amount of public complaining that would keep us from reissuing if they met the other measures?
It's a political decision, and so I'm sure there is a certain
It's not
amount, but I
codified.
just don't know what it is.
May I say something?
Councilmember Burt.
When we first started looking at the cabs, we did get some complaints from citizens because they were not really carrying themselves. They weren't clean, and they did not know how to be polite to the customers. And I think from the complaints that we got from some of the cabs, from some of the citizens about the cab tax. We built up this ordinance. That's why it got to where it is. They were very competitive. Only one, the first company was the Bluebird. And then when the Claytons, as he said, came in, they just fought back and forth, and it was just, and we developed something through this board and then the council to say we will have this for you all. And you need to look at that ordinance. I don't know when the last time, Mr. Chairman, we have reviewed it, because it was not in good standards, but some of them. But the council felt that we need to have something, since it's our ordinance. Then if we have these cabs out here, then we're concerned about the safety. And I believe Mr. Ring talked about how the city Charlotte may look at the safety once.
And Mr. Ring, since the conversation has been brought up, if you can just, you touched it earlier, but if you can briefly mention the process that we use to vet the particular companies.
Yes. Applications for new companies are officially taken in October of each year. As part of that application, the company turns in it's an application with name and address, a short financial statement, along with a statewide criminal background check, and if they're not driving, they don't have to submit the drug screen, but if they are driving, they have to submit the 5-panel drug screen. As long as they meet the criteria as far as convictions or no convictions in the city code, then we pass them forward to council for consideration.
Are there any questions about the process before I come to you, Councilman Light? Councilman Light is recognized.
Okay, I'm still worried about the digital thing. Okay. You have if you hire a taxi, a ride from Uber, you have no assurance that they have insurance and all this, that, and the other, or does their company require that of their drivers?
Uber has and says that they have insurance, or at least that's what their website says, and that they review their drivers, and they look at background checks and look at the cars. Best that we can tell, they do this through email and pictures back and forth, but they say they do review their vehicles and drivers.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Ring on the vehicle for hire process or the internet dispatch? Mr. Ring? Okay. Councilman Burke, did you want to, can we close it out?
Mr. Turner,
Yes, ma'am.
I know you said this was introduced in Raleigh. What representative, legislator introduced that bill?
We'll have to go back. We'll go back and research that and bring the information back to the committee. I'm not sure, but we do know it was legislation recently introduced in response to this new industry.
And I think as we talk about that, when Mr. Turner gets us that information, really as a city, it's out of our control, because that's just being mandated through the state telling us. And when you look at that, Mr. Turner, they're telling us this, but so as far as the safety, welfare of our citizens, once they start operating in this city, if something happens, who will be responsible? That's another question we need to ask those people in Raleigh.
Those people. Well, I agree.
And Councilman Burke, just to briefly state, and I'm sure you know this, Uber is already well and operational in the city. I have a friend who actually operates as a driver. He loves it. It creates jobs for some of the people in the community, but there is the overall question of safety, and we have no ability to regulate that. But I will say this, those things that are under our purview, such as the vehicles for hire, we regulate, we watch it closely, and we do what we can to keep our citizens safe. Now, if it's internet dispatch, we can say as a city, we've discussed it, we have our eye on it. The General Assembly has or has not taken a look at it, but we're doing everything we can do on the local level to keep it out in front. Anybody else want to talk about it before we move forward? Councilman Black.
So conceivably, the drivers who have their own cars already, who work for a cab company, could sign on with Uber.
Sir?
And they do.
They do?
Yes.
Okay. And so is this the wave of the future, that it's all going to go to this type of digital whatever?
It certainly could be. Well, as a society, we're moving more towards our smartphones, and you see everybody walking. We get more comfortable with it. It could be the way we go.
Thanks, Rod.
Councilmember McIntosh.
You know, as we change from the original model of taxi cabs over to the lease model, I think this is the next model that the industry is moving towards, and it's big. The amount of business that flows through Uber somewhat vets it in and of itself. So there are hundreds of thousands of people using it daily, and obviously they're providing a need that the market values because they're now a $13 billion company or so. They're now a very big company. So that in and of itself says that they're doing something right, and they're doing enough well to be able to grow that quickly.
Are you finished, Councilmember McIntosh?
Yes.
Councilmember Black.
So does that mean that, okay, when you do the app thing, where is it locally, digitally run, or is it in California?
I don't know where their server farm is, but your GPS on your phone tells their server farm where you are within a couple of feet, and it'll also tell you where the taxi cab, the Uber cab, is located within a couple of feet of you.
Right.
You look at a map and you see him and he sees you. So there's probably not any physical presence here of any infrastructure.
And you get to decide who comes to get you, and you get to negotiate your price.
Can I ask for a Mercedes?
If there's one around, I'm sure Attorney Carmen has one. All right, any other questions for Mr. Ring?
I think Derwick has.
Thank you,
All right,
Mr.
thank
Ring.
you.
Good presentation.
Thank you, Rob.
Before we close out, that was the only item on the general agenda. I do want to make everyone aware that there's a Public Safety Black History Month program, and that program is coming up on Sunday, February the 15th at 3 p.m. It's going to be held at Galilee Baptist Church, which is located at 4129 Northampton Drive in Councilmember Burke's ward. So everyone, it's a wonderful program. I've had the opportunity to attend. Councilmember Burke has been attending for a very long time, and hopefully you come out and celebrate with us. We have a lot of pioneers and trailblazers who've done a lot of good for our city, and on that day, Sunday, February the 12th, 3 p.m., we will be honored, February the 15th at 3 p.m., we will be honoring them. Is there anything else for the good of the order? There's nothing further. We'll consider this meeting to be adjourned.